The sun sank slowly behind the dry hills, painting the sky in quiet shades of gold. On the old wooden porch, two aging bodies shared the same bench, just as they had for decades. There was no hurry. There never had been. The cowboy rested his worn hat on his knees. His hands, shaped by years of hard labor, lay still. His eyes followed the horizon, as if searching for something he had never learned to name. Beside him, his wife watched the small garden, tending to the flowers with her gaze alone. Her white hair was neatly tied back, her apron clean, her face calm, the face of someone who had learned how to wait. Between them, silence was not absence. It was accumulated history. Time had passed through that house the way it passes through the land, without asking permission. It took words. It took chances. It took people they loved. But it left behind something hard to explain, a love that endured without ever learning how to speak loudly. Sometimes, what weighs the most is not what was said, but everything that remained unspoken. This is a story about growing old together, about a marriage that crossed decades, and about a man who never knew fear, until he realized time does not return. Every morning on the ranch began the same way. Before the sun fully showed itself, the cowboy was already awake. He brewed strong coffee, no sugar, just as he always had. The smell filled the simple kitchen, blending with the distant sound of roosters. His wife rose shortly after. There was no alarm clock. Her body knew the hour on its own, shaped by decades of routine. She folded the quilt carefully, as if she were still making the bed for children who no longer lived there. They rarely spoke in the mornings. There was never a need to. Every gesture was already known, every step expected. He went out to tend the horses. She stayed behind, sweeping the porch, watering the small garden, letting the bread rest on the table. There was tenderness in those habits, but also distance. A kind of distance that doesn't hurt all at once, but settles in slowly, like fine dust. When he returned, his plate was already served. Always a little fuller. She watched to make sure he ate well, without saying a word. He thanked her with a small nod, never lifting his eyes. It had been this way for years. Maybe for too many years. The love between them was never made of declarations. It was made of presence. But presence, sometimes, is not enough to warm the heart. The cowboy had not always been a quiet man. In his youth, he spoke with excitement, laughed easily, made plans that felt bigger than the ranch itself. But life in the fields teaches hard lessons. The land does not answer emotions. Cattle do not wait for explanations. Work must be done, rain or shine. Over the years, he learned that speaking too much did not change things. He learned to swallow frustration, to tuck sadness away alongside his old pocket knife. When crops failed, he did not complain. When the children grew up and left, he did not ask them to stay. When his body began to weaken, he called it nothing more than fatigue. For him, love always meant providing, being there, not giving up. He never feared hard work. He never feared loneliness. He never feared the end. Silence became his armor, and he believed that was strength. What he never noticed was that little by little, that same silence was pushing him away from the one who mattered most. His wife had always been the invisible center of that home. She didn't need to raise her voice to be heard, nor impose rules to keep things in order. Her strength lived in consistency. She cared for the children when they were small. She stitched clothes, prepared home remedies, waited through long nights when they came home late. When they grew up, she let them go without holding them back, even with a heavy heart. With her husband, she learned to love the way he knew how to give love. She never demanded words he did not know how to say. She never asked for gestures that did not come naturally. There were days when she felt alone, even sitting right beside him. But she chose not to turn that feeling into bitterness. She chose patience. At night, before sleeping, she whispered a simple prayer. She did not ask for great changes, only protection, only the strength to keep loving in that quiet way. Her faith was silent, just like her. But it was firm. She knew that true love is not perfect. It is persistent. And even as time began to weigh on her shoulders, she remained, just as she always had. There was a time when the ranch felt too small. The walls heard laughter, arguments, footsteps running through the halls. The table was never empty, and silence was rare. But time passed. The children grew. Life called each of them down a different road. Visits became rare. The grandchildren came only on marked dates, bringing noise for a few days and taking it away just as quickly. When they left, they carried with them a quiet that was hard to explain. She felt the absence. She kept old toys, small clothes, memories with no more use. He watched it all in silence, pretending it didn't matter. At night, they sat in the living room, each in their own chair. The dim light. The clock marking hours that felt too long. Sometimes the radio stayed on just to fill the space. The house was still standing. But something inside it had grown too large for two tired hearts. That was where all the unspoken words lived. That afternoon, nothing seemed different. The sky was clear, the wind light, the work nearly finished. But the cowboy's body decided to speak for him. A sudden weakness came over him. His legs faltered, the world turning slower than it should. It wasn't pain. It was a warning. He tried to hide it, as he always did. But she noticed. She always noticed. Calmly, she moved closer, held his arm, helped him sit. There was no panic. Only care. He breathed deeply, staring at the ground, uncomfortable with needing help. She stayed by his side, without questions, without judgment. In that moment, something shifted inside him. For the first time, he felt fear. Not fear of dying, but fear of leaving her. The silence of that afternoon was heavy, different from the others. It carried urgency. Time, which had always seemed distant, was now sitting on the same porch. Sitting side by side, the sun beginning to fade, he broke a habit built over decades. His voice came out low, unsure. He said he was tired. He said maybe he had lived wrong. He said he never knew how to show what he felt. The words came in pieces, as if they weren't used to daylight. He did not look at her. He feared the answer. She listened without interrupting. Her hands rested on her lap, her gaze steady, present. When she spoke, there was no accusation, only truth. She said she had always known he loved her, even in the silences, even in the absences. She said that loving someone for so long is also learning to accept their limits. He felt the weight of the years fall on his shoulders. But for the first time, he did not try to hide from it. Time would not return. But that moment still existed. That night, the cowboy could not sleep. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the house. He thought about the years gone by, the identical days, the words that never came. Now, the fear was clear. Fear of not having time left. At dawn, he sat beside her at the kitchen table. The coffee cooled between them, forgotten. He reached out and held her hand. He said nothing, but he did not let go. She looked at him, surprised. Her eyes filled with tears, but her smile came first. It was a simple gesture, small, but one she had waited for her entire life. In that silence, everything was said. The days that followed brought no miracles. His body remained tired, time kept its pace. But something had changed. He began to look more, to listen more, to be present in a different way. She began to rest more, to trust that, at last, she was not alone in that quiet marriage. They did not need to reinvent life. They simply found each other again within it. Love, at last, had room to breathe. At night, she returned to whispering her prayers. This time, he stayed beside her. He did not speak the words, but he listened. They did not ask for complete healing, nor for endless days. They asked for time. Time to be. Time to care. Their faith had always been simple, and perhaps that was why it was strong. The ranch remained the same. The wood creaked. The sun set. The days passed. But now, they passed together, truly together. He learned that courage is not only about enduring. It is about allowing yourself to feel. She had always known. Growing old together is not easy. It is a quiet act of love. And sometimes, all we need is to say today what silence carried for years. Love that endures does not make noise. It waits. If this story touched you, subscribe to Moments That Matter. And leave a comment. Did this story remind you of someone you love? Because there is still time. There always is.